Hello and welcome to the show with me, Gillian Gotzel. Today, my guest is Shane McCarthy, who is the MD and founder of Ireland Craft Beverages. Whoa, we got a chance to talk about beer. What a lot of fun. So Ireland Craft Beverages, it's a logistics and sales platform, basically. So tell me, how did it come about?
So Ireland Craft Beverages, that came about 2014. It was a trip home. I was living in New York at the time. I was actually working in the finance industry. My background's in finance, and I came home for Christmas. I was working actually over in the finance district down around Wall Street in the technology industry, and I had this yearning of always wanting to come home. I travelled quite a bit. I'd been in New Zealand before that, in Australia, and previously down in Dublin working. So after coming home for Christmas, I had this idea. I was living in New York, and there were so many bars. A lot of my friends were working in the bar industry, and they had bars, or they wanted to have bars. I just seen a lot of this plastic patty, as they call it, where you had Murphy's and O'Connell's and a lot of names that were all pouring Guinness or Smithwick's, or the same kind of one-dimensional offering that was seen as brand Ireland. And being, I suppose, kind of seeing and growing up through the new generation of people that have travelled from Ireland. For me, coming home, I had an idea of why aren't we exporting some of the best products that are actually from Ireland? And meeting up for some Christmas beers with a good college friend of mine, I had a chat with him over some beers at our local pub, and I kind of was talking to him about an idea of creating a platform to allow these small artists and producers to bring their product to the world and allow a real true taste of Ireland to be seen, and not this one-dimensional kind of, how I seen it, is almost monopolized, where all these taps and offerings were maybe...
I mean, the beer market, the drinks market in Ireland has gone through a revolution, because back in the old days, every parish had its own whiskey and it's had its own beverage. So that's how it used to be. And then the big names came in, swallowed everything up. So it was like a monopoly. So the very big names, which are good brand products. But now in the last 10 years, there's been a proliferation of craft beers and distilleries and gins and vodkas, and it's like amazing.
It's great to see. Like, people love choice and variation, and it can saturate very quickly. And 2014, it was going through that growth phase. And for me, it was Irish whiskey that I was most interested in getting behind, that whole history. Especially, we were almost taken out of the history books. Scotch is still very prominent, and at that stage, craft beer had more dominance in what was happening in the space. It was probably an easier access to market because the breweries and capital needed to create a brewery was a lot easier than getting behind a large distillery project. But from that, I suppose a friend of mine, Liam Brogan, who was a chartered tax accountant at the time, both of us decided it was actually first, our New Year's Eve, we set up the business, Ireland Craft Beers and Beverages, and we started creating this export platform. So it was a matter of starting a business from scratch and taking our ideas and.
So you weren't actually making the beer. You said, right, guys, you're the artisan. You're the people making the beers and the ciders and the gins and the whiskies. We're going to help you with the supply chain and with the
more access to market, more avenues. We want to help you guys grow outside the domestic market. So a lot of it was a learning process, both not just for the new breweries, because all of these new breweries were startups as well, but even for ourselves, understanding the lay of the land, the personalities, even everything from the tax and excise. It took us about 9 months to get all the licenses, the warehouse and logistics set up. So that was all a massive learning curve for us in the startup world, and raising a small bit of capital to start executing and becoming a player in the space. And for us, we didn't want to do anything domestically. It was export only. So we didn't want to step in any toes of people that were doing, for us, the local market should almost be looked after by the artists and producers or relationships within that market. So we wanted to bring something new and concentrate our focus on export only. So that's where
it came from. But you have then subsequently, there's two other businesses that are producing beer and whiskey. One is the downstream blockchain beer, which is why we're here,
correct.
And the Killowen distillery. Maybe just the Killowen distillery. Just mention that briefly for us. It's a whiskey. It's the smallest
it's an whiskey
distillery.
It's officially the smallest in Ireland at the moment. It's the only flame fed, from my knowledge, the only naked flame fed distillery in Ireland. And its MD is Brenton McCarthy. He's a very, very brilliant character in the space. The distillery is 1 year old at this stage, but I suppose them businesses almost grew from our passion that came about in the whole craft brewing and export business, and our continued learning in the space brought about these new opportunities, I would say, to kind of bring disruption, but also to open up new opportunities for Irish businesses, and to be a kind of first proof of concept as well. So that was quite important, that we were innovating and bringing these to market, not just to showcase suppliers, but to showcase the rest of the world what you could do with this.
So going back to the Killowen's the smallest distillery, but possibly not forever in Ireland.
Yeah.
The downstream blockchain beer. So you're now bringing technology into craft beer. How does that work? Yeah,
so I suppose putting aside the whole blockchain element, blockchain itself it's in the simplest form, it's a secure database. So what you're doing is you're building an audit trail of everything that happens. So for us, we've felt that you could bring much more trust to the market through the use of transparency. So empowering the consumer by giving them the data, giving them everything from whether it was the mineral makeup of the water to the malts to the hops to the yeast. And we didn't want to, I suppose, overdo it with people that just don't want a massive data to look at. So we decided to integrate that with a UX interface, so a visual. So plugging in the secure data that we were pulling directly from the brew process, and then the supply chain that we would implement. And then the consumer would simply point their camera at the beer. They would be prompted by the QR code, which is front and center of the brand, to go into the beer and then follow the journey of their beer. But for us, it's verifying everything that they want to know. Is it from an independent brewery? Yes. Is it from where it says it's from? And how has it made it into your hand? So many brands are contract brewed, or large corporations will have huge facilities where you don't actually know where the liquid is coming from. So provenance was very important for us.
Because there is an issue, isn't there, in the craft beer industry, what people term crafty beers, which is not a compliment.
That's it. Yeah, and that's where the spark of downstream came about. A lot of our suppliers were being squeezed by these brands and these fake brands in the domestic market where we weren't actually involved in, but we were seeing headlines and we were getting a lot of feedback that they couldn't compete. These guys with millions in marketing budgets were coming in and saying, creating these fake brands, and the consumer didn't know any difference. We wanted to empower the consumer by, everyone has a smartphone in their hand, so we wanted to give them that ability to at least verify their product. And even craft beer itself is there's so much choice. It confuses a lot of consumers. So if you allow them to dial in and kind of absorb some of the information or verify that it is coming from a local brewery that they love to support, and you're creating that.
And you're right about it with I have two daughters, 26 and 23. They read labels. They read labels like they're bestsellers, I'm learning to as their mom, but it's funny to see that kids, they genuinely do read labels. It's a thing now, which I know it's stating the obvious if you're a young person watching, going, what is she on about? But, when I grew up, I never read labels. It's changed everything around.
And there was that. People, I suppose, had their local grocery store, and a lot of that market would have been local as well. It would have been probably a farmer not too far away, but it's become so vast in these larger supply chains and imports and exports and globalization that there is a large gray area in where even your meat is coming from, or your grain, etc. So labels, they certainly should be read, and websites and research, but I think there is that barrier of making it as easy as possible, and that's where it gets interesting. I find with this whole Internet of Things concept, and people using technology to really quickly verify. And a lot of people now, they don't absorb information, I would say, the way they used to. They would quicker know where to get the information rather than regurgitating it from their mind, I find. And that's where I think it gets interesting with what you can do with this technology.
And is there also elements of like, what about fair trade? That, the whole idea.
Yeah, well, what I would say is, for a period, I was kind of quoting that this was fair trade on steroids, where you really cannot break up the chain of events. It's immutable, and everything that happens has to be recorded. And that audit trail, being immutable, is where the power in this technology comes into play. And
what about carbon? Is there any? Do you have any?
Yeah, I did have a lot of back and forth conversations with some larger corporations here in London that were interested in. Carbon's become very vocal and mediatized the last 2 to 3 years, maybe lesser. And that has turned people's attention, and when you turn people's attention, the capital flow starts to go that way. And so with carbon footprint, there's so much you can do there with it. And where I would see it going is you can create a hypothesis where you can have a facility or a supplier that's you can take the variables of how much water do they use, how much electricity do they use, and you can scrape that straight from their systems if it is quite an advanced. If not, you can scrape it from their data sheets, and you can give that information to consumers. But where the flip side, I would say, is people are seeing less planes in the sky, and they're thinking they're working from home. It's way more environmental. But is it though? Because the questions hasn't been asked that how much carbon footprint does these massive servers that we're building and we're putting data into the cloud use? So, it would be very interesting, I feel, to look at how much usage even we use in our Zoom calls, in our phone every day, because huge servers. You look even in Ireland where I believe is it Microsoft or Google are trying to build these huge servers off the coast of Galway, and people don't understand that these servers use way more electricity than the whole of Ireland uses as a whole. So there's a fascinating counter argument where, on a balance, where we're bringing all these big names in as their headquarters and they're starting to create jobs, but how much jobs, and then what's the detrimental effect of that? So that's where I would kind of be in my understanding of carbon footprint at the minute. But you can certainly give people that information if that creates more trust in I suppose the carbon footprint of a facility and a supplier's process.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I hadn't considered about the server farms and the data centers that are being built here.
I know they are trying to create this carbon neutral, as they're calling it, but what does that actually mean? And 2030 is what I think Google are looking at, and most of it is actually cooling down. So you have to cool down the server, and you have to create so much energy to do that. So they're looking at innovations like taking the servers below water, which is something that Microsoft has done because it's so cool. So they're putting servers underwater to try and help with that process. The same with mining Bitcoins. That's why they're always done in minus very cold countries and atmospheres, because that helps. It's actually the electricity usage that helps kind of their break-even point to mine new Bitcoin.
Yeah. So with going back then to the beers again, so go back on the downstream blockchain beer. What is your vision for that? I mean, it's been produced in Meath, am I right?
So originally we created it in Moore Mountain Brewery. That was, as I said before, previously, it was maybe 2.5 years ago where we created a first batch run, and we created this whole digitization process, and we put it onto a QR label. And then we had buyers here in the UK that were e-commerce. So they bought the whole batch and we sold through it. So it became really popular, and it kind of got some media attention. And then
did you sell it to one bar or to number of bars?
No, we sold it only to e-commerce online. So we could
okay.
Yeah, so all of it went into one of our online relationships we have here in London, called Honest Brew, and they sold through it all for us. That created some attention in the space. And then we had Marks and Spencer's, who some of the larger retailers were feeling the squeeze of farmers markets. People were shopping more local goods, and they wanted to push transparency within their space. So they approached us to do a contract with them on the downstream beer. So with that scale up, we had to look at bringing it from bottles into cans. So then we went to Boyne Brewhouse in Drogheda, who helped us with that whole process. So we moved the process down to Drogheda to start contract brewing, and it was exclusively launched into Marks and Spencer's then.
Wow.
So that was great. Again, it got a lot of attention, and it almost just organically grew. We weren't putting any marketing budget behind this. We weren't putting any sales force behind this. It almost evolved out of that vision. And then another larger online consumer based up in Scotland, Phil's Hill, they're called, in Flavorly. They then approached us and said, we'd love to develop more recipes with you guys for our platform. So then we brought 3 more recipes.
And why were you chosen? Was it because of the quality of your beer, or because of the technology you were bringing with it?
That's it. We obviously, I suppose, being in the space for that period, the guys in the team all love craft beer. They love whiskey, and our knowledge in this space, everything from recipes to, the styles of beers evolved very quickly. And first and foremost, we actually set out to make sure that the product and liquid was really high quality before the technology. The technology for us was secondary, even though it was a kind of proving a point of what you could do. And I think with that quality, and also being able to hit the price point, so we weren't having to overprice it, like double the price of any other beer.
But you were also very lucky, because you were making to order. Like, it's not as if you were making it, where we're going to sell it.
No, that was it. That was something
that's like the holy grail. Yeah. That's the holy grail of making a product and having a buyer for it there and then.
Yeah, well, I think that kind of reverse process, it helps take the risk out, and it's something you learn very quickly in the startup world. You need to mitigate risk as much as possible. So having that almost pre-order allowed us to preempt and be a little more ambitious with what we wanted to do with it. So I suppose, coming back to the technology aspects, we did have to integrate with another blockchain company to secure that data, which were known as ARCnet. Again, they were based in Belfast and Edinburgh. So we had an office in Belfast, and we were able to liaise with them quite closely in this process. And they were already doing some traceability for the Scotch whiskey space. I think it's called Fusion Whiskey is who the product they were working with at the time. So they were able to bring that understanding into the brew process, and we were able to create this audit trail that we could put a footprint onto products. So what you're doing is just you're digitizing a physical product, and then you're putting it into the cloud and creating that audit trail. So yeah, that's where it got to. But the difficulty was that, as we spoke about there, you're securing data and you're holding all of that. So it sits in the cloud, but you have to pay hosting charges. So that becomes a little bit detrimental, where there's a break-even point. If you're not selling high volume, then you're paying the hosting charges. So about 9 months ago, around that period, we decided to shelve it because we didn't want to push it. I felt that the technology was still catching up in the space, and there was more innovations happening. So we just shelved it and focused on our brands and the whiskey, and with so much other plates spinning. Even though it was a great innovation, we put it on the shelf, and then only recently I've started working with a new labeling 2-in-1 solution, and I suppose that's where we're at with the brand now.
Okay, and the new labeling, that's the GPAS.
Yeah, GPAS, and it was actually just through LinkedIn. I'd seen through a lot of my followers, someone had shared that they had implemented QR and they'd use secure blockchain to actually bring this patented technology to market. So I've had a number of calls the last 6 weeks with these guys back and forth, and it's a very interesting technology. It evolved out of these guys. The GPAS spun off from ink cartridges, which were a huge problem for fraud maybe 8 or 9 years ago, and they created this amazing platform to trace the ink cartridges throughout the world. And with that involvement in the space, they then spun off and started offering a solution.
So it's provenance, supply chain and provenance, and secure provenance.
Yeah, that's it. That's pretty much what they're looking to do, and people are using it for different variations. For us, it's about simplifying that provenance and verification aspect. For others, they're using it massively for fraud because they lose millions in countries where there's parallel trading between containers. And then for others, I know that Coca-Cola are looking at using it as well because they want to look at the environment and recyclability of their plastic bottles. So if they can track and trace them throughout the world, that's an element that they're looking at using it. So there is, and this is quite new in the space, in I'd say the product space, but not how they've used it previously.
So are you a craft beer business? Are you a whiskey business? Are you a technology business? Have you decided what you are?
Yeah, that's a bit of everything, but no, we certainly wouldn't see ourselves as a technology. We have a lot of knowledge in the space, and we give all that to our suppliers, and we liaise with them and consult with them if they want to move into the space. But we don't have our own platform. We're not building anything in terms of, everyone in the blockchain space, everyone is offering something new and different, but I suppose there's private blockchains, public, and that's just a whole different area of conversation. But for us, we're utilizing it as
technology as a tool.
Company.
As a tool.
Technology as a tool, exactly. And us as a beverage company, we feel that we can use this very interestingly. Sometimes when innovations come to the space, the larger rigid companies are just too big to try and implement something new and different. And it's always this, I find the small startups are able to really disrupt and bring something new to market quicker.
Wow. That's very to me. I love it. So when I saw that name, it passed across my desk and I said, the downstream blockchain beer. I have to find out about that. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time today. I wish you every success. I want to hear more about, I want to find out, let me know when the Killowen becomes the second smallest distillery.
For sure. And the beer, as I said, the beer we're hoping to bring back to market in the next 4 to 5 weeks. So,
and do you have buyers for your next lot of beer?
So it will be available on Flavorly, the same guys that do the e-commerce. So we are working with them. I
think you're officially called Jammy. You're working in a business that you enjoy, and you keep on selling your product before it's even made. Wow! Well, so congratulations. That is amazing. And do keep us up to date with the ongoing saga of the downstream blockchain beer.
For sure. Thanks very much, Jenny.
Thank you very much indeed.